The snow had been falling for days before Christmas. Not the gentle kind people like to photograph, but the heavy, suffocating kind that erased roads, swallowed sound, and made the world feel abandoned. And by the night of Christmas Eve, the town of Graymore felt less like a place people lived, and more like something left behind on purpose, which was exactly why Samuel Reed had chosen to come back. He sat alone in the dark living room of his childhood home, the power long gone, the only light coming from the fireplace and the Christmas tree he had dragged up from the basement and decorated with trembling hands, using ornaments he hadn't touched since he was 17. The house smelled of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic, a smell that made his throat tighten every time he breathed too deeply. Outside, the wind howled softly, but inside the house there were other sounds, subtle ones. The slow settling of floorboards, the whisper of air moving through halls that should have been still, and underneath it all, a low hum, like a distant crowd murmuring just out of reach. Samuel tried to focus on the tree, on the way the lights blinked unevenly, because if he let his thoughts wander, they would return to the reason he had left Graymore in the first place, the reason no one ever spoke about the old church anymore, the reason the town population dropped every winter. At 10:47 p.m., the humming turned into singing, faint and distant, drifting through the walls as if the house itself were remembering something it had tried to forget. A Christmas carol sung too slowly. Every word stretched and strained, the voices layered and wrong, some deep and hollow, others high and thin, like children forcing air through frozen lungs. Samuel's hands clenched into fists as recognition washed over him, because he knew that song, knew the way it echoed inside stone walls, knew the night it had been sung last, the night the storm came without warning and the roads closed and the town gathered in the church basement for warmth and shelter. He remembered standing at the door with the keys in his hand, listening to the panic inside, listening to the pounding and screaming when the generator failed, telling himself someone else would unlock it, that it wasn't his responsibility, that it was Christmas and he wanted to go home. The singing outside grew louder, closer, and the temperature in the room dropped so fast, his breath fogged the air, frost creeping across the windows in twisting patterns that looked disturbingly like hands reaching inward. The ornaments on the tree began to sway, even though there was no wind, each one reflecting distorted fragments of his face, his eyes sunken, his skin pale, his mouth pulled tight with regret. Then came the knock, not sudden, not violent, just a careful, polite knock on the front door, followed by another and another, each one landing with perfect patience, as if whoever stood outside had all the time in the world. Samuel backed away, his heart pounding so hard it hurt, because he remembered that knock too, remembered it echoing through the church halls, remembered ignoring it. The singing stopped abruptly, plunging the house into a silence so thick it pressed against his ears. And in that silence, he heard movement. Footsteps circling the house, slow and dragging, stopping beneath each window as if checking to see if he was watching. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the screen lighting up, despite having no signal, displaying dozens of missed calls, all marked with the same timestamp from years ago, all from numbers labeled only as unknown. When he pressed play on the first voicemail, he heard nothing at first, then the sound of wind, then sobbing, then a familiar voice whispering his name. The front door began to open on its own, the hinges silent, cold air pouring in, along with the smell of snow, rot, and damp stone. And one by one they stepped inside. They looked wrong, not fully solid, their bodies swollen and pale, skin cracked and darkened by cold, eyes glassy and fixed on him with something far worse than anger, recognition. Children clutched frozen hands together. Adults wore coats stiff with ice, and all of them smiled with mouths that trembled, as if struggling to remember how joy once felt. They filled the room slowly, crowding closer, their shadows stretching too long across the walls, and when they spoke, their voices overlapped into a single sound that made Samuel's bones ache. They reminded him of the cold, of the darkness, of the singing that turned to screaming when the air ran out, of the doors that never opened. The Christmas tree lights flared bright white, illuminating the room as the clock on the wall began to chime midnight, each strike echoing like a hammer inside his skull. And with every chime, the figures became clearer, more solid, more real, until they stood around him in a perfect circle. The carol began again, sung beautifully now, strong and full, the way it must have sounded before the panic, before the cold, before the silence. Samuel tried to scream, to beg, to explain, but his body wouldn't move, his muscles stiffening as frost crawled up his legs, his arms, his chest, locking him in place while icy hands rested gently on his shoulders, his face, his heart. When the final note faded, the fire went out. The lights on the tree dimmed to a soft glow, and the house fell silent once more. In the morning, when the storm finally passed and the roads reopened, the people of Graymoor found Samuel Reed's house standing untouched, smoke no longer rising from the chimney, but through the frost-covered windows they could see the Christmas tree glowing warmly, perfectly decorated, and beneath it stood Samuel, frozen solid, eyes wide with terror and understanding, his mouth open as if still singing, while carved deep into the wall behind him, in uneven, desperate letters, were the words, "We sang until we couldn't breathe, and you still never came." The snow began falling before dusk on Christmas Eve, thick and soundless, the kind that swallowed the world whole and left nothing but shadows and pale light behind. And I watched it from the window with a feeling I couldn't name, because the house had been too quiet for too many years now, ever since my mother died and took her laughter with her, and I was alone again, just like every Christmas since, putting up the tree because not doing so felt like an invitation for something worse, hanging ornaments she once loved, their glass surfaces reflecting a thinner, older version of myself. And I told myself tradition mattered, that it anchored you, that it reminded the dark you were still here, still alive. And as the night deepened and the wind pressed against the walls like fingers testing for weakness, the clock edged closer to midnight. And that was when the knocking began. 3 slow taps at the door, careful and deliberate. Not the kind of knock made by someone in trouble, but by someone patient, someone who knew they would be answered eventually. And my heart hammered as I stood there listening, because no one ever came here anymore. No one remembered this house. Yet the knock came again in the same steady rhythm, and against every instinct, screaming at me to stay still. I opened the door to find only the snow-covered porch and a single small present placed neatly on the welcome mat, wrapped in red paper with a green ribbon tied too perfectly to be casual, and a tag hanging from it that read, "To, you from, Santa," in a childlike hand. And I laughed under my breath, because fear feels ridiculous until it doesn't. And I picked it up and noticed it was warm, not just warmer than the air, but warm like skin, like something alive had held it moments before. And I brought it inside and locked the door, sliding the deadbolt with more force than necessary. And I set the present beneath the tree where the lights blinked unevenly, casting long, crawling shadows along the walls. And the house felt smaller then, tighter, like it had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. And I tried to distract myself with the television, with the noise, but the silence underneath it was too loud. And then, at exactly midnight, the music box in my mother's bedroom began to play, even though it hadn't been wound since the day she died. Its melody slow and broken, every note dragging behind the last like it didn't want to arrive. And I walked down the hallway with my pulse in my throat and found the box spinning on the dresser by itself, the tiny ballerina turning endlessly, her painted smile cracked. And behind her in the mirror, I saw a shape that wasn't me, tall and thin and wrapped in red that looked dark and wet in the low light. Its head tilted at an angle no human neck should allow, and when I spun around, the room was empty, and the music box snapped shut like teeth. And when I returned to the living room, the present beneath the tree was gone. And that was when the footsteps started upstairs, slow, bare feet against wood, unhurried, unafraid, moving with purpose. And I felt the house listening again, felt the walls remembering something they wished they could forget. And I climbed the stairs without realizing I'd decided to, drawn forward by something heavier than curiosity. And at the end of the hall, my childhood bedroom glowed with a warm yellow light I hadn't turned on. And sitting on the edge of the bed was a man dressed like Santa, but wrong in ways I couldn't fully describe. His suit hanging loosely over a body too thin, the red fabric stained almost brown in places, his beard clumped and yellowed as if it had grown there unnaturally, and his eyes were pale and empty and fixed on me with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. And he spoke softly, gently, as if scolding a child, telling me I hadn't hung my stocking this year, that it made things difficult, but that he'd brought me something anyway because he always keeps his promises, and he held out the present, now soaked through, heavy enough to bow the cardboard, and my hands shook as I took it and opened it and found my mother's hands inside, preserved perfectly, her wedding ring still on one finger, her nails painted the deep red she wore every Christmas, and the scream tore out of me, but died before it could fill the room, swallowed by the house like everything else. And Santa stood then, growing taller than the ceiling should allow, his shadow stretching unnaturally long. And he told me lonely children get special attention, that those who wait quietly are remembered best. And when the lights went out, all at once, I felt his breath against my ear, cold and sweet like rot beneath pine. And days later, when they found the house buried in snow, the tree was still standing, lights blinking faithfully, presents untouched beneath it, the television still humming to no one, no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away into the storm, except for one new stocking hanging by the fireplace, stretched heavy with its contents, faintly warm to the touch, as if Christmas had only just ended and someone was still inside the house, waiting. If this gave you chills, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more terrifying encounters.